Welcome, everybody. My name is Concha del Camino de la Fertilidad, the fertile path. And it's my mission to help you, your future children, and this planet to recover optimal health and fertility, to regenerate. I'm so inspired by all these young people who are now going on the street, protesting and fighting for climate and for their future. And my contribution is to show the surprising and empowering parallels between what's going on the outside and with what's going on the inside. Because in truth, the outer environment is merely a reflection of our inner environment. And the state of health of this planet obviously influences our individual health, but also vice versa. Our individual health also influences the state of health of this planet and our collective health. And we do not always make these connections. And it's easy to blame and to point fingers or to completely feel powerless and overwhelmed and disconnect. And the goal for me with this presentation is to put the power and the responsibility back in our hands, while we continue, of course, to also fight for a change in political structures, which is very needed. But we also can do a lot on an individual level. And that's the goal behind this presentation that I share with you today. So I'm going to start by giving an overview of the main symptoms Mother Earth is suffering from right now, which you're probably all familiar with, but it helps to put them in perspective because we're going to come back to them later when we make the connections with individual health problems. So the Earth is very sick. We see that everywhere. We see an alarming rate of deforestation and in consequence a loss of biodiversity, both in the plant and in the animal kingdom. We cut down trees and plants, and as such the animals lose their natural habitat. Species going extinct at every minute. And that's not just true for wildlife, it's also true for livestock. So the animals that we use for meat and dairy production, we see that there only a handful of breeds are actually used, the most profitable ones, the most that will create most money, while the others are neglected and actually left to go extinct because these days, if nobody takes care of them, if nobody invests in them, spend time to raise them, they will not survive. We do not have this habitat anymore. And so we see also on the livestock level, like a huge reduction when it comes to the animal breeds. Whereas in nature, there's hundreds or thousands of different types of pigs. We use just a handful or not even. In consequence of this huge loss of biodiversity, we see the loss of fertility and health in our plants and in our soils. So in general, biodiversity is needed for resilience, for strong health. If there is just one species of the same kind, whenever a pest gets in, it's very easy for the whole system to collapse. So variety is very important. And we see all over the world how our soils are losing fertility, how they are becoming less and less able to produce healthy plants, strong plants. So we see also that our plants are suffering more and more from disease. They are weaker, they contain less nutrients, In consequence, they are attacked also more and easier by pests, because that's nature's way of getting rid of what's not strong enough, what doesn't carry really the best genetic material. And we see our soils turning into desert. The soil also carries bacteria, and so we see the loss of diversity also on this level when it comes to microorganisms, but also, of course, to the life that's contained in the soil. A handful of fertile, healthy soil is very rich in life. There's all kinds of organisms living in it, and it's moving, and you will probably find worms in there. Whereas this dry and dead soil, there's nothing living in it. And it also loses completely its capacity to absorb water and to store water, which then again causes new problems. And this desertification is really affecting the whole planet at alarming rates. And there are prognostications that within a very short amount of time, a big portion actually of our planet will turn into desert. And that includes countries such as Spain. And since this climate is getting so out of balance, we see both extremes. We see on the one hand, fires breaking out easier because everything is so dry and desert-like. And on the other hand, we see floods because also our soils are no longer able to store water. And so we see these extremes in climate conditions and in natural catastrophes all over the world. The Amazon burning is the most popular example right now. Pollution, both of the air and the water. Stagnation as well of the water, things not flowing and dying basically. We have a huge problem getting rid of all the waste we produce. We've tried to send it away to other countries, but it's coming back to us now. There's no way anymore we can ignore it. For a long time we've been able to look away because it was just not in our face, but now we're suffocating in it. And there's just no more space, and it becomes very visible how problematic this is. We treat our soils and plants with a lot of chemicals. We spray most of our food. Most of our food is grown in a way that is industrial and uses a huge amount of chemicals, so to say, to protect the plants and with the goal to produce more food, with the idea behind that otherwise we would not be able to feed the whole population. And so we use also synthetic fertilization, and we even started to genetically modify crops to make them more resistant, for example. It's no secret how we treat our animals, that we abuse them on a massive scale, that there's a lot of torture and suffering, that we keep them in factories and treat them as commodities, and that if they are not productive, if they do not produce anymore, or if there's no way to get money out of them, we just throw them away, like the male chicks in this picture who do not serve to produce eggs, so they are discarded right away. So we really treat animals as things. Also, there's a lot of human suffering all over the world. There's a lot of hunger. There are people running away from unsupportable conditions like war or hunger. And war and destruction is very present in many parts of the world. We are the lucky ones that are not directly concerned yet, but it's very real for very many people all over the world. So with all that, it's of course easy, so easy to be completely overwhelmed and to feel hopeless. Because what can I do? in the face of all these global problems. And so we either completely disconnect and close our eyes and look away and pretend it's not happening, or we start to point fingers and blame other people and governments, and of course always the other people, the bad people who in the factories who torture these animals and so on. But as I already mentioned in the introduction, as above, so below, and as within, so without. As the universe, so the soul. So what's going on the outside is really a reflection of what's going on the inside. As a collective, of course, we are all individuals, and there are people who are healthier than others, and there's also parts of the world that are less polluted than others. But on a collective scale, what we see in this world, this massive destruction, this massive suffering, this massive dis-ease, that's what's also going on for most individual people. So I'm going to explain this a bit more, this concept. How can it be really that what's going on inside of me ends up being reflected in the outside world? How is it that the health of my soul will be reflected back in the health of the soil that my food grows on, and vice versa, of course? So it all starts on the soul level. So the body lives downstream of the soul. It all starts in the belief system. And even if you do not believe, so to say, if you say, oh, yeah, I don't believe in anything, that's a belief system too. So I'm not talking about religion here. I'm really talking about how you feel that life works. What are your beliefs? And most of us, even if we are no longer members of churches, have been raised in a culture of Christianity. In like if you have lived in Europe, for example, and so we've all been conditioned with certain underlying belief systems. And for most of us, that's a scarcity way of looking at things, a scarcity mindset of a picture of a God who is rather cruel and punishing, of Judgment Day, of the idea that you either go to heaven or to hell at the end of your life, depending on how well you behaved, on the idea that there is competition, that there's limited resources, that it's either you or the other. And so oftentimes, very unconsciously, we hold these kind of beliefs. And that produces certain thoughts. So our underlying beliefs fuel our thoughts. So if I hold a belief system that this is an either or, that there's not enough, that I will be judged, then, you know, when something, so to say, bad or seemingly bad happens to me, I will, of course, look at it as a sort of punishment. That this is now an indication that indeed I've been behaving badly, I've been the bad girl, and so I deserve to be punished, and I might think thoughts actually that I am a failure and I'm just not good enough and I don't deserve and everybody else does, and what does she have that I do not, and so we might have all these thoughts, self-attack ourselves maybe, or be angry, blame others in our minds, blame the universe, blame God, if we call it like that. And in consequence, we will feel a certain way. So we will feel, as I already said, angry maybe, or frustrated, or we will feel sad or hurt, or unseen and unworthy. We will feel maybe very insecure about ourselves and afraid in general, if we always feel like we're being judged for everything that we do, and afraid that there might not be enough for us, not enough love, not enough material things, not enough money. And so we might feel also jealous about other people if they succeed, and feel like that their win somehow means I'm at a loss. And so there will be a lot of contraction, there will be a lot of defensiveness, irritation. And that, of course, affects the body. We'll talk later a bit more about the connections between the mind and the gut, especially the brain and the gut. But you might all know from own experience that when you are stressed or anxious, for example, how that affects your digestion and your gut. So that's very easy to understand that there's a connection. And the gut also affects your inner body, let's say, affects your outer body. So whatever goes on in your gut will be represented also, for example, in your skin or in other parts of the body. We will talk about this a bit more later. But there's a clear connection between what's going on your inner inside in the body and on the outside of your body. And of course, also all these thoughts and emotions lead to actions. If you feel jealous or angry or hurt, that will determine the way you behave. Maybe you enter conflict easier, or you are defensive, or you are lying maybe, or at least not communicating as openly because maybe you're afraid that this will be used against you. You might not be so generous because you feel, okay, I need to keep for myself. If you feel unworthy, you might also start to self-attack, not just through thoughts and the way you talk to yourself, but also through behaviors. Eat maybe junk food, smoke, drink to deal with all this stress and anxiety. You might choose partners that are not treating you well, that are toxic for you. You might not feel like you deserve to actually follow your dreams and rather stay in a job that you don't like, but that at least pays you money because you believe that there's not going to be enough money maybe if you follow your dreams because you don't trust. And so in the end, all of this, first of all, of course, then also has an effect again on your own body. So the food you eat, for example, will also influence again your gut. The substances you consume might influence your mind, and the conflict you have with your spouse, of course, will maybe confirm your beliefs that you're not worthy, you knew it in the first place. So there's this feedback loop, and of course that will then again, it keeps alive as sort of a vicious cycle. But of course also all your actions and behaviors and decisions accumulated determine really your personal environment. So your individual environment. Remember, we're talking about the environment, the inner and the outer. So then your personal environment, your work, your family's situation, your money situation, the relationships you choose, even the place you live, will all be a reflection of how healthy and how fertile your belief system and your mindset is. So whether it comes from a place of scarcity or abundance, and that will be reflected in your relationships, in your job, in the place you live, even in the food you eat and the clothes you wear. And of course, all the personal environments together determine the collective, the close collective environment. First of all, the city and the country, and then eventually the whole world, all the countries together. And so if I self-sabotage, for example, and I eat junk or I smoke, well, all of this also has an impact then on the outer environment, on Mother Earth. Because how is this junk produced? It's produced in a way that harms Mother Earth. It creates waste, which harms Mother Earth. If you smoke, you're literally polluting the air. And of course, the soil, if you throw away then your cigarette. So all of these actions, they influence the state of health of Mother Earth. If I am making healthy choices for myself, then usually, for example, healthy food that's been grown in alignment with nature, well, then this is good for me and good for her. So you see, it works in both ways. And of course, it also then comes back to us. Again, another vicious cycle or virtuous cycle, depending on whether we look at a rather state of disease or of health. Of course, then the more polluted the planet becomes, this will, of course, again affect also our body, mind, and soul. And so we keep alive this vicious cycle or virtuous cycle. I was now explaining it more as a vicious cycle because we see on a collective scale rather dis-ease than health. And so the health of the soul really equals the health of the body. And likewise, in nature, the health of the soil equals the health of the plant. So usually when a plant is sick, you look at the soil because that's where the plant grows in. And so we need to fix the soil if we want a healthy plant. Unfortunately, that's not really the approach we're taking these days, and that's where things go wrong. But common sense would lead you there. And so the health of the soil determines the health of the plant, and the health of the plant, again, determines the health of the ecosystem. And an ecosystem is made up of other plants, of all these microorganisms, but also of the animals and the humans. And as such, the health of the plant also determines the health of the animals and humans who eat this plant. Or of course, then we eat the animal who has eaten the plant as well. So, but it's all connected, and one influences the next. So if already the soil has not been healthy, the plant cannot be. And so the animal who eats the plant or the human who eats the plant cannot be. And ultimately, so the health of the soil really is the health of the soul. That's the whole message here. So health of the soul equals health of the body, equals health of the soil, and equals health of the planet. And it goes in both directions. And it's up to us to determine whether this is a vicious cycle leading to more and more dis-ease and pain and suffering, or whether we turn this around into a virtuous cycle, so creating more and more health and fertility and regenerate ourselves and regenerate this planet. Let's now look at some concrete examples, starting with biodiversity and balance. So I already mentioned that in order to maintain balance, we need diversity. If there's just one species, it's not balance, it's domination of one species. And that can very quickly lead to imbalance in the system and to one species completely taking over and creating disease, and actually a system that's not very resilient and very, very prone to collapse or to become sick. Whereas if you have a lot of different species, they balance each other out. There's a lot of synergies, but there's also competition, some eating the others, and so they always keep a balance. And that's true in the macro, so when we talk about the plants and the trees and the animals, but also on the micro level when it comes to bacteria. And that's also true for the human gut. As in the soil, so it's in our gut. The microbiome is a huge topic in science right now and has been for already some years. And also we lose diversity in our gut microbiome. So there's less and less species of bacteria compared to before. And just an imbalance as a consequence in these bacteria as well. And if there's an imbalance in the micro, this will lead to an imbalance in the macro. So if there's an imbalance in the bacteria, on the bacterial level, then in the plant now, for example, then this will also lead to the plant being affected by pests, insects, parasites. And the same is true in our gut. So if we have the overgrowth of certain bacteria or organisms, can also be yeasts, then we also see that parasites or other pathogens install themselves easier. And that's also true or due to our use of antibiotics, for example, which really wipe out all of the bacteria, and then some of them easily overgrow. It's kind of as if the parents are not at home, and then, you know, wow, it's fiesta. So there's this parallel going on, that we lose biodiversity not just in the outside world, but we lose it on the inside when it comes to our own bacteria inside of our gut. And that's a huge problem, because the gut is where 80% of our immune system lies, and the gut is linked to the rest of the body and really determines the health of the rest of the body. So the gut will not just affect your digestion. If you have an imbalanced gut flora, you will also have a somewhat permeable gut, which we call leaky gut, which can then affect the brain, can give you mental health issues. It can give you mood issues. It can show on your skin. The gut is really actually called the inner skin. So also skin issues are always linked to the gut. Joint pains, sinus issues, respiratory issues, autoimmunity. So the immune system completely having turned against yourself. All of this can be linked back to the gut. It's still studied by science, and science is still picking up actually, but in functional medicine, this has been known for years already, that whenever there's disease, you look into the gut, because disease starts in the gut. And so this biodiversity loss is behind most, if not all, of our diseases these days. I would say there's probably no disease where you cannot also find an imbalance in the gut flora. And the same is true in our outer environment, that this loss of biodiversity is behind all these other problems that we see, such as the desertification that I mentioned, and as such the floods, and the loss of resources, which might lead to wars and all of that. So it's crucial that we start there. And I mentioned before that there's really this connection, that of course the brain influences our gut, as we know, when we have an emotion and we feel nervous and we feel it in the gut. But also really what's going on in the gut and the food we eat and all of that also determines our behavior. So that again shows how the health of the gut determines ultimately the health of the soil. because it affects our behavior and the choices we make, the products we buy, the food we eat, which eventually comes from a certain way of production, which affects our soil in one way or the other. Fertility is a big topic, and it's very close to my heart. Camino de la Fertilidad is really the focus of my work. And not just when it comes to conception, but in general. To be fertile means to be creative. And we are losing our ability to create life, but also to create in general. And our planet as well, it's losing its ability to produce life. And why is that so? Well, if you look at this soil, you can easily see it, because it's just completely exhausted and depleted and dead. It's empty of life. It has nothing more to give. And so it's just a protection. It's wisdom of nature to no longer allow anything to grow on an exhausted soil, because there's no substance to create. And it would either kill completely the mother or produce a very weak plant, which in itself would not be able to survive or to reproduce. And of course, this doesn't happen from one way to the other. It happens gradually, as we shall still see. And the same is true in the human body. So we see a lot of problems these days with conception, but it doesn't start there. And of course, the loss of fertility of our soils directly impacts our human fertility through the food that we eat. Because how can a food that's been grown on a depleted soil carry all the nutrition and nourishment that we need for optimal fertility? And so we do no longer get all that we need to keep our batteries full. And so they get depleted too. And the more depleted we are, the more likely we are also to engage in actions that then further aggravate the planet's fertility as well. And unfortunately, we have not yet learned to look at fertility problems, struggles, as an invitation to nourish the soil. We rather look at it as a punishment. So we come from this mindset, that this happens because I was not a good person, and so it's happening to me to punish me, whereas actually it's there to protect you from harm, because your body would not be able to support you and your baby. It's probably not even able anymore right now to completely sustain you. And so, since your body always works for you and its main goal and reason for being is to keep you alive, it just doesn't allow reproduction out of love for you. So if we looked at it like that, we would easily see that our body is just asking for nourishment and for regeneration. But in turn, both in conventional agriculture and in the human body, we turn to artificial and synthetic fertilization. We try to still force the mother earth or the mother human mother to produce, in spite of her clear signal that this would not be in her and her offspring's best interest at this point in time. And we even start to genetically modify crops, just like we do in vitro fertilization. So there's these parallels, and the more we yeah, we continue to buy food that's been grown using these methods, the more likely we are also to end up needing such a service, because the food simply doesn't supply us anymore with what we would truly need in order to be truly fertile. And we continue to treat the mother heavily as well with toxic substances, so to say, also to protect her and to help her to still continue to produce. But it all comes always from a place of forcing and of pushing, rather than listening to her and what she would need to naturally, happily produce. And just like our soils are depleted and would no longer really function without all of this treatment, our mothers are so exhausted, even if they still managed to conceive and to give birth, even or actually because they still were able to. But that, if they were already running on reserves, it left them maybe even weaker. And then they are faced with all the responsibilities of working mothers these days, all these double and triple responsibilities. And so they run on coffee, which is, so to say, also a toxic substance, or at least a very powerful substance that can quickly become toxic, especially to an already drained system and depleted system. And even if we are still able to produce fruit in such a way, and we are, and it looks perfectly, sometimes even too perfectly, like fruit, but it no longer has the substance and the nutrition and the nourishment that it used to have, like apples that grew or still grow naturally on trees, completely unprotected. They are much stronger. They have to defend themselves. So they create antioxidants, more of those substances, which are good for us too. So they are much more nutrient dense and rich. And they grow and they are beautiful and they don't need all of that chemical stuff. They might have their little damages, yes, but they are overall much more resistant and resilient. And so the same is a bit true when it comes to our babies, unfortunately. So we are, of course, still producing babies. And they look like babies, and they are babies, beautiful babies. And they are weaker. They lack the substance and the resilience. And they are weaker in general and depend oftentimes on medications because they are much more susceptible to sickness. And then we give them these kind of foods, and so the cycle continues. So it's important to be aware that fertility, just like any other health problem, be it blood sugar, or it doesn't happen from one day to the next, that one day you're fertile and the next you're no longer fertile. It's a continuum, and it starts slowly. First, the soil starts to get a bit weaker as we also start to become more depleted and tired and fatigued and have pains here and there, menstrual issues maybe. And then we see the plants that grow in the soil become weaker and have more diseases, just like we see so many childhood diseases these days, which didn't affect children just a decade ago. No, maybe a few more decades ago, like 50 years ago. Diabetes used to be once the disease of the elderly. Now it's very usual and typical for younger children, or obesity. So we really see that the plants we produce are getting weaker, just like the plants we grow for food. And of course, there's this connection between them because we feed this food then also to our children. And so the cycle continues. Until then, in the end, we find ourselves in a desert, both on this planet and in our own bodies. Cancer. Another epidemic disease these days. I think there's nobody who doesn't know anybody who hasn't suffered from cancer. I think we all have cases in our families of people who have had to struggle with it or maybe even died from it. So for me personally, that's true. And I'm sure for you too, it's true as well. Maybe you struggle even yourself. And cancer in the physical body are cells that have started to grow in an uncontrollable way. And they started to grow in a very egoistic way. So just thinking of their own growth and disregarding the system, disregarding the needs of the structure actually they live in and they depend on. So in the end, they destroy this very structure they live in and depend on, and they all die together. And that's exactly what we see happening when it comes to the idea of perpetual, unlimited economic growth. So it's all about money and making more and more and more profit. And it seems like growth is always the objective. And this is actually behind all these destructive measures that we see done to the planet. It's to exploit the resources to continue growing. And everybody thinks about themselves only, and they want to make more profit. And there's the competitor, and there's not this systemic way of thinking that, in a way, if we destroy the system, we destroy ourselves. And so you can see completely the mirror effect. And of course, the more we destroy the planet and the more toxins we release into the air while doing so, the more likely we are to develop cancer. Many of these substances are known to cause or contribute to cancer. All these endocrine disruptors, which are byproducts of industrial production processes, and all the products that are produced also and that we use. And the more we suffer from cancer, the less energy we have to take good care of ourselves, to make good food choices, for example. The more we depend also on stuff that's again produced by the industrial system. So there's again this vicious cycle, one fueling the other. And it's just an interesting observation that the rate at which we cut down the rainforest is kind of similar to the rate at which people die from cancer. So it's really no exaggeration to say that we are now in the cancer stage of capitalism. And I'm not saying that capitalism as such is bad, but we are exaggerating it. We are no longer considering the system and the structure of this planet that we depend on and that we are about to destroy, just like the cancer cells destroy their own habitat. And then in the end, everybody dies. So if that's what we want to avoid on a planetary scale, then we also have to look at cancer in our own bodies and what contributes to cancer. How can I adjust my diet, my lifestyle, and even my mindset? Cancer is influenced by so many factors, like sugar, but also like certain emotions. And we do not have the time now to go deeper into that, but we can maybe not take care now of capitalism directly, but we can always take care of ourselves. And that's the whole point of this message and presentation today. Other people call this age we're in now the age of stagnation, and stagnation is actually something that's also omnipresent in the human body. Stagnation is another word for pain, actually, because wherever energy stagnates, where it doesn't flow, it creates pain. Chronic pain is something so present. Everybody almost suffers from some sort of pain, whether it's headache or back pain, lower back pain. It's quite common. Menstrual pains. I mean, I've personally suffered for years from menstrual pains, which in Chinese medicine are actually linked to a so-called qi stagnation of the liver. So connected to certain emotions and energies not flowing. Polycystic ovary syndrome, so cysts and fibroids, it's always a stagnation of blood or other fluids, for example, but also emotions on the more symbolic level. Just like our waters are stagnating. And stagnation that's been going on for long enough will create a lot of pressure and heat. And it can then at some point just simply burst. And that's the moment when you get a heart attack, for example, which is basically stagnation that's blown up. Or children with emotional outbursts, or also adults. Just like we see these wildfires, this aggressive energy, this burning fire, too much heat that's been accumulating. Or we see the opposite, that we drown in all these floods of emotions, for example, or indeed real waters when it comes to the planet. Or then food also, emotional eating. And again, the more depressed we are, we might make choices that, again, harm ourselves because we hate ourselves and we self-sabotage. And so we definitely do not eat well or have the energy to really follow our dreams and to put into place projects that actually help the world. No, we're much more likely to just continue business as usual, to work for companies that might be contributing on some level to this whole industrial system, making matters worse, or we just depend on the system, or so again, the more sick you are on a physical level, the more you will contribute, unfortunately, to maintain this very system you might be so against at, you maintain it alive, because you simply also don't have the energy to deal with anything else than your own survival at this point in time. Waste congestion. So I said how the planet is suffocating in waste. And the same is true for us, for our bodies. They are overloaded with toxic garbage, waste. And this is visible in so many physical symptoms, which might not seem very bad, or they might even seem normal because so many people suffer from them, but normal and common are two very different things. And so we might be tired, or we might suffer from constipation or body odor or mood swings, or gain weight, or have skin issues. And it's all showing how toxic we are, how much garbage there is in our system. And of course, the more garbage there is in our system, well, again, the more garbage, excuse me, but the more garbage we will produce, both in the physical, so the more plastic food maybe we buy, and the more stuff we buy to compensate, and so we continue to actually contribute to this whole waste problem also for the earth. And then again, this waste, of course, that's suffocating the earth. It's releasing toxins, which again add to the toxic load in our bodies and keep us in this state and make it worse. And so we again have this vicious cycle. And this is also why in city environments where the air quality is very bad, where there's a lot of air pollution, we tend to have much more mind pollution as well. So mind and air, the element of the air is the mental element. So thoughts and air correspond to each other. And so all this air pollution actually is a very symbolic also of all this mental pollution we have of toxic thoughts through conditioning, through the media, through what we read and watch and listen to. And you notice maybe when you go into nature where the air tends to be a bit cleaner, even though it's also still often polluted through agriculture or industries, but it seems clearer, and it is clearer because that also the mind calms down. And of course, the calmer the mind, the clearer you see, the closer you're connected to yourself, to your intuition, to your real desires. And the clearer you see, then the better, of course, you also, or the more likely you are to have actions follow this awareness. So to engage in practices that actually are good for you and for this planet. Whereas the more mental garbage there is, the more you are in your head, and the louder this voice is, the less you're able to actually listen to your soul, and the more likely you are to actually stay and contribute to this whole industrial system, which makes yourself sick and unhappy, but also this planet. The water elements corresponds to emotions. And here as well, we see all this water pollution, just like we see emotional pollution. And I'm not saying negative emotions are bad. Negative emotions are as natural as so-called positive emotions. And we cannot be selective about our emotions. They are all good and they can all be very useful. The problem is when we dwell in them, when we drown in them, when they suffocate us, basically. And so it's again about this balance in a way. And the more toxins we absorb from the environment, the more likely we are to see things also through a negative eye. And the more negative we are, so the more contracted we are, the more likely we are, as I already mentioned a few times, to self-sabotage and to engage in behaviors that are not supportive for our own health, and as such also not supportive for the whole. We already talked about the earth and the body, how we pollute the earth and pollute the body, and how a polluted earth contributes to the pollution of the body, and how a polluted body will be more likely to contribute to the pollution of the earth. We talked about, or I mentioned, animal abuse also as one of the symptoms of suffering. And most people are outraged when they see these pictures. And still, this is only a reality because we make certain choices. because we want always more. There's this growth also. It's linked to cancer as well. So this constant more and more and more and cheaper, cheaper, cheaper leads, of course, to these conditions. And we also have to see how it's not just a problem in the animal world, but it's actually a problem also on the human level. So we're not just factory farming animals, we are also factory employing people. So many people actually work in factory-like office boxes, and they might have very limited breaks. They might have quite inhumane working conditions. And of course, if you work in such an environment, you will be depressed and angry and probably not well nourished, eating out of plastic boxes also. And of course, as such, contribute also to this factory farming of animals, because all this ready to eat food and junk food is never made with ethically raised produce. And I'm not just talking about animal foods, it's true for any kind of produce. And of course, the more we eat then these kind of foods, well, the more we add stress to our system from all these stress hormones, the more we add inflammation to our body. And all of that doesn't help to create a healthy body, and as such a healthy mind that would feel unworthy of such working conditions. In fact, it would also feel unworthy of such a food. But you accept both, and by doing so, they both, you keep yourself in this vicious cycle. Another similarity we can see, like in the way we select animals depending on their gender, we also see that in certain countries when it comes to human embryos. So in some countries, it's still common practice to abort female embryos, just like we kill male chicks because they don't produce eggs. Hunger, the world hunger that we can see in the outside world, is also a reflection of our inner hungering, often for more connection and meaning, actually, to something bigger than ourselves, to a community, and simply just to ourselves, actually. We are so disconnected from our own soul. So we are so stuck in our head that we completely lose touch with our own inner needs and desires. And even in our countries, we see this hunger in the outside through the rising and alarming number of eating disorders that are especially affecting younger people. And especially now with all this pressure from social media and so on, picture perfect world. About 80% of 10-year-old girls already feel bad about their bodies and go on diets. And that's just really the visible part of it. But all addictions, in a way, because eating disorders, in a way, it's an addiction too. All addictions, whether they are to substances or to food or to alcohol or to obsessive behaviors, it's always about a hunger for something more, meaning, purpose. It's not just physical hunger, we have emotional hunger too. So it's a reflection of that as well. And sometimes, indeed, seeing all these pictures of suffering children, we might ask ourselves, where is the meaning in all of that? And we might even feel like, there is none. And so this fuels, of course, this feeling of being lost somehow. and that it just all doesn't make sense. And the more we feel that way, again, the more we are likely to continue to contribute to the system that keeps alive all this suffering through the products we buy and through where we put our energy, who we work for. Just like there's people running away from war and destruction in their countries and from hunger, we run away from all these emotions that would show us the deeper hunger we have and the deeper needs that we have. And the more refugees that come to us, the more certain emotions are triggered. So for many people that provokes fear or anger. For some also sadness and worry. Worry about themselves, but also worrying about these refugees. And so this might again fuel then this whole running away and projecting it actually on the outside. And the more we do this, the more conflict we are likely to create, and which will again be reflected also in the outside world. As war and destruction is, because it's really not just happening in Syria, it's happening right inside of you. So many people these days suffer from autoimmune disease, and autoimmune disease is really the biggest symptom on the physical level for war against yourself, for self-destruction. Your immune system is destroying itself. Or let's say the immune system is attacking your body and destroying your body. Which also means, as we already said, the physical level corresponds to the emotional level, corresponds to the mental level, corresponds to the soul level. That on an emotional level, you're working against yourself, probably by suppressing your emotions. That on a mental level, you're probably having self-loathing thoughts, self-judgments, being very hard on yourself, constantly comparing yourself, and of course, being inferior to others. And then, of course, you might project all of that on other people, feeling like they judge you, but you're mainly judging yourself, actually. And all of that based on a belief system that somehow you are not good enough and you will certainly be punished and life is against you. And oftentimes that will somehow show also in your relationships. Because if you are not at peace with yourself, you will also attract people who you feel you deserve. And there will likely be conflicts and toxicity in the relationship and attacking each other rather than really supporting each other from a real place of love and wanting the other person to become the best version they can be. Then it would be more like a competition actually in the relationship rather than a true soul collaboration. And conflicts between individual partners, as I said, then this turns into conflicts in the personal environment, then this turns into conflicts into the small collective environment, and then into conflicts on the country level and on the world level. So really, it all starts inside of us. And of course, all this destruction which we see on the outside might fuel, again, certain self-destructive tendencies. Again, you see the connection. And in order to change this vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle, we need to change our perspective on symptoms. We need to look at them as warning signs, what they really are, both on the individual level and the planetary level. These health problems are simply pointing to underlying issues. And the state of health fertility of our planet points to the state of disharmony of all our bodies and souls as collective. So a symptom usually starts out very softly. It's like an alarm in a car, where it gets louder and louder the more you ignore it, the more you try to suppress it, until eventually your car, your body, the system might crash and will crash. Unless we learn to look at really what is the alarm pointing to, and don't just try to, fix the alarm. So if in the car you have an alarm, you don't just, put a Band-Aid on top. You go and look, what does this light mean? Is this the motor, or is this, the oil? So you really look for what it symbolizes, what it points to. So as I said, it all starts in the belief system. And right now we have a collective belief system of looking at life, at our body, at ourselves, at symptoms as the enemy, as someone who's there to just annoy us, to punish us, because we've been bad and we will go to hell probably. But is that really true? I say no, it's not. Actually, this world, life, your body, yourself, your symptoms, they are your best friend, and they are always here to teach you something important, which is in your best interest ultimately. So it's a true opportunity. If we stop fighting the symptoms, but listen to the message they contain and they point to, we can actually heal ourselves and this planet at the root level, rather than just symptom controlling and actually making matters worse and worse every time and eventually crashing. So we really have the power, and with power also always comes responsibility. So we do not have to put our head in the sand. We can do a lot, even if, of course, the political structure is important and we should continue to fight for that to change. But we really can turn things from a vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle, because as you saw, it works both ways. What's happening on the planet, yes, it impacts us, but also what we do on an individual level impacts back on the planet. And of course, ideally, we work on both levels simultaneously, but we can always start somewhere. And by improving your individual health, you can truly improve the planetary health. And then it's like a ripple effect from you to your close ones, to the city, to the country, to the world. And the more we improve the planetary health, this will make improving our individual health easier and easier and easier. So it's really becoming a virtuous cycle. It doesn't have to be a downward spiral. It can become an upward spiral, and we can turn things around. So in order to restore the outer ecology, make it a priority to restore your inner ecology and see really how the state of health and fertility you are in determines your actions, and how these actions really contribute to the outer ecology. Take the responsibility and assume the power you have. You make a difference. We all do. So challenge your belief system. Switch it from an enemy-based mindset to a friend-based mindset. Balance your inner masculine and feminine. So, take into account the needs of your physical body and your emotions. Nurture yourself, which is really the feminine, rather than always putting performance and growth first and coming from a place of force, which is the rather immature masculine. So develop your ability to become present with yourself, to be aware of all these connections. So bring in consciousness, which is the evolved masculine. Hold space for your emotions and physical needs. Improve your self-esteem. find purpose and meaning. All of that will contribute to you making healthier choices for yourself. And the healthier choices for yourself will always be also healthier for the planet. There's no separation. What's good for you is also good for the planet, and vice versa. Yeah, work on your emotional body. Develop this intimacy with yourself. So into me I see. Get to know your innermost truths, needs, desires, and express them fully and authentically. Nourish, of course, your physical body, which is your soil. Regenerate yourself and heal your gut, which is at the basis of physical health. The more in balance you are as a person, the more balance you will bring to the world. Feel well and do well. It's really that easy. And the more balanced this world becomes, the more in balance we will be as well. So it's really a virtuous cycle that you can be part of right now. For further exploration, I invite you over to my website, caminodelafertilidad.com, or on Facebook. You can reach out, and I'm happy to guide you on your individual path, either one-on-one or in my virtual Camino program. Also organize group events from time to time. So really get the support that you need and start taking baby steps. And over time, this will really make all the difference. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a buen camino.